Let's talk about values in games. Yeah, okay, I can already hear the moans in the back, but it's important, I swear. Turns out, a lot of our discussions about games deal with values. Violence in video games, tropes versus women in video games, Gamergate, these are all discussions about values, because they're about what people find important. Violence is bad, so why is it in the games we play? Why are game characters over-sexualized? Games should be fun! Why is this political correctness in my games? Turns out, there's a handy framework to guide some of these discussions. It's called Values at Play, and it's been expanded into a whole bunch of other frameworks. Ethical game design, empathy game design, anti-oppressive game design, they're really useful if you're trying to look at specific values and if you're looking at design. But what about values more broadly? How do they interface with development or publication, for example? We'll look at this using the GameSpace model, which has 5 discrete stages that cover the whole game lifecycle, from concept all the way through to afterplay. First, we have to figure out what values are, though. This is kind of tricky considering they're inherently linked to what people find important. Looking at definitions, we can get some ideas. Values are abstract, they deal with relationships, motivations, attitudes, and traditions. They can be properties of things or states of affairs, qualities of environments, personal traits, political states, grand ideals. Generally, values tend to issue specific descriptions for more abstract ones. We can talk in circles about this forever, so let's just go with this definition. Values are the abstract representation of properties, actions, and motivations used to describe concepts that an individual or group finds significant. Now we know what values are, we can look at the game space so we can see how values integrate into each space. Ooh, pretty diagram! 8 game as components fit into these 5 spaces. The design space deals with concepts and ideation. The development space deals with making the thing. The publication space deals with, you guessed it, publication. The interaction space is where the game is actually played, and the reported space looks at how the game is analyzed and critiqued based on how players recall their experience. There are various ways we can integrate values into the design space. All of these elements can have values embedded in them, but broadly we can separate them into narrative, systems, and presentation. Values exist in narrative because of how a context is presented. A game about throwing oddly shaped juice down a well sounds gross, right? Well, yes, but it's also Tetris. A simple coat of narrative paint can heavily engage players with values. Systemic integration of values is slightly harder, but it can be done. Train gained notoriety for being a mechanics-driven game where players unknowingly transport people into concentration camps. Oof. Values can also exist in presentation. The black and white world of Chicory explores values of creativity, well-being, and expression by having players color the world in after a character falls into depression. Values can be integrated into the development space when developers consider the kinds of experiences they want to make. Turns out, making personal games can be a useful way to explore and process lived experiences. As a result, personal game jams are becoming increasingly popular. These game jams use simple tools like Bitsy to empower marginalized creators to learn about and make games. When making these games, developers need to engage with these experiences and their own values to actually make the thing. Who'd have thought, right? Values most often appear in the publication space with publishers' organizational values. Valve has had a bit of a torrid time with this. They initially claimed that their values wouldn't influence the games they published on Steam. Then Active Shooter came along. And Rape Day. So, Valve changed their guidance. I wonder why. Given that kind of controversy, publishers might want to avoid those pesky values. But the critical success of The Walking Dead Season 1, The Last of Us Part 2, Death Stranding, and Life is Strange True Colors suggests that some players really enjoy playing with values, so publishers might be engaging with values for a while yet. The interaction space deals with how values manifest when a game is played. This is typically how we think about values in games, and as a result, countless values can manifest depending on the game. So let's look at why players might want to intentionally play with values. This can range from basic morality play, killing the quest giver, to dark play and positive-negative experiences, where players intentionally court negative experiences to safely and cathartically explore their own values. Gang Rape says hi! Looking at specific values, empathy has recently exploded in popularity. Games like Real Lives allow players to fully embody the perspective of characters from anywhere in the world, using real-world data, and task players to live their lives. Violence is a little played out, so let's talk about violence through irony. Spec Ops The Line pulls no punches here. You were the bad guy all along. Surprise! Similarly, September 12th has players eliminate some terrorists in an Arabian marketplace, except the explosion radius is so large that you inevitably kill some civilians who, oh look, they're terrorists now. Then, for well-being, there's the whole games for health agenda, you know, Pokemon Go, Zombies Run. The sector is growing though, with more games tackling mental health instead of physical ones, with games like Depression Quest, just as fun as it sounds, and Self-Care, a game in which you stay in bed all day and cuddle your cat. Pure bliss. Finally, there's the reportage space, where our values influence how we think and talk about games. Generally, when we talk about values in games, we're talking about pro-social ones. Kindness, sharing, community, things that can make the player better, and indeed, games can have these effects if they're so designed. These games can help players process personal experiences. Depression Quest players, for example, reported that playing it encouraged them to seek help, suggesting that games could potentially be used as a form of creative arts therapy. Then there are those ideas we brought up at the beginning. Discussions of the values that games should or shouldn't embed. Games might always be criticized for being too sexual, too violent, or too offensive, and some people might disagree. That's why understanding values is important. It allows us to reason that a pig raping a human might be justified in a horror game, but coercing an African American protagonist to rape someone in a first-person shooter? Yeah, let's not do that. Phew, that was a lot of analysis, so here's another pretty diagram. Look! Values are everywhere, and that's kind of the point. Values aren't the weird, gross philosophical stuff that we should recoil from like vampires in the sunlight, but a core part of games. Considering them in all areas of the game's lifecycle will help move the medium forward. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Can I say that? Is there like a copyright or...